Now, in what is becoming an annual tradition, the Finance Act 2020 was passed by the National Assembly and signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari. That's on the 31st of December 2020. Finance Act of 2020, which came into effect from 1st January 2021, complements the 2021 federal government's budget of economic recovery and resilience. The 2021 Finance Bill, which has now is yet to be signed into law, and it was presented to the President, of course. This seeks to support the implementation of the 2022 federal budget of economic growth and sustainability by proposing key reforms to specific taxation, cost of excise, fiscals, and other relevant laws. I introduced him earlier. He's a partner at Pedabo, Mr. Killian Khanoba. Good afternoon. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Tolu.
Compliments of the season.
And I'm wishing you the same.
Yes. I'd like us to start with the highlights of this bill. We've had a lot of talks around the Finance Act. Give us a professional look, or let us understand what it really stands for and what are the highlights.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah.
I will first and foremost say that the 2021 Finance Act may not be as robust as the earlier ones that we have experienced, being the 2019 and the 2020 Finance Act. Those ones were very special in a way because they were novel for us after a very long time. Yeah. So the 2021 Finance Act is expected to be signed soon. Based on our followings of the processes, we understand that the National Assembly is about done with it, and it should be presented to the President anytime soon. Key highlights based on the recent information that we have are that one, of course, the one that shocked everybody is the introduction of stamp duty to the disposal of shares, which was proposed to be disposals above 500 million. Interestingly, the National Assembly think 500 million is too high, and they are actually reducing the threshold to 100 million. And they are also retaining 10% stamp, CGT rate as against the 5% that was proposed. So that's a big change that we are going to see from the Finance Act. There is also the increase in the education tax rate from 2% to 2.5% of accessible profit. There is also an attempt, I would say, to remove the exemption that private educational institutions currently enjoy under CETA, which means that depending on how they are organized and how this law is going to be interpreted, there's likely going to be income tax chargeable on private educational institutions. Then there is the issue of the opportunity now for the government, the tiers of government, to have access to the funds that have accrued on the stamp duty revenue, which has been collected by the banks and has been warehoused with the CBN. There is an amendment. There is an amendment to the Stamp Duty Act that now gives the minister 30 days from the signing of the act to ensure that the funds are distributed, and subsequent accruals will also be shared within 30 days of every month that they are collected. Then there is the introduction of the sweet tax, I call it, which is excise duty on soft drinks, non-alcoholic drinks, carbonated drinks, and sweetened drinks. Which is going to be charged at 10 naira per liter of any drinks that are manufactured or imported into the country. Interesting ones also are the grant of more powers to the Federal Inland Revenue Service. The Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act will now be the preeminent tax law. So it will now have precedence over any other tax law over which they have authority on. And the one that interests me also is the fact that the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act is being amended to outlaw the activities of other government agencies that are tantamount to incursion into the space of the FIRS. So you've got government agencies who on their own actually initiate tax investigations and audits on companies outside the scope of FIRS. Now the law is prohibiting that, and it's actually introducing an imprisonment of up to 5 years and a fine of 10 million naira for people who are found in default of that provision. Of course, we've got the police trust fund, which had been in place for about 2 years now, but there have been no framework. That FRS has now been granted the power to also oversee that, collect and enforce collections also. Then there is another earmark tax. Earmark tax are taxes that have been put in place to meet specific purpose, like the tertiary education tax. Now you have the NASENI fund, which had actually been there, but has really not been in the tax space, so to speak, in practice. The Finance Act 2021 is bringing that to the fore and is now giving FRS the authority to assess and collect the 0.25% of profit before tax from all companies that are operating in Nigeria. So I would say those are the interesting highlights from a practitioner's perspective.
Yeah. Now, the challenge of implementation is something that comes to my mind, and I'd like you to take us through this, because we're supposed to plug wastages, close openings, and all of that. Now, do you think we have had a good enough track record to believe that this document, and talking about the implementation process, what do you think?
Yeah, I think a document is just a document until it is given life to. Of course, a law is a law, but if you do not implement the law, then it's not worth the paper on which it is written. So in terms of implementing the Finance Act, I think so far, from the experience we have seen with the 2019 and the 2020 Finance Act, there indeed has been efforts by the Federal Revenue Service, which is really the principal authority, to see to the implementation of those acts. The Nigerian Customs too has also played a very significant role in implementing those the provisions that were introduced. But we wait to see what is going to happen with the 2020. Key thing I expect is where I expect challenge is the issue of the amendment to the FRS Establishment Act, which now outlaws the activities of agencies like the EFCC, agencies like the RAMFAC, the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Allocation Committee, and even the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation, who have also, over time, constituted themselves as tax authorities. So I hope that we are likely going to see some legal fireworks in place if there is going to be resistance. But I expect that as co-travelers in the same government, that they should all work in sync and remove the uncertainty that they tend to create by getting involved in taxation.
Now, back to the highlights. We're not talking about sweet tax, we're talking about carbonated drinks, we're talking about, and Nigerians will say, at this time, government is trying to get more money. But many also say there are other ways that we can expand this tax net other than taxing people more. I don't know. Are we looking at that informal space and others, so that we can, because this is looking like government needs money. Yes, I agree. But how do they go about this so that the masses don't feel the brunt, don't bear the brunt at the end of the day?
I agree with you. Although street tax, the way I see it coming for us really now, any revenue that government is trying to tax, any activity government is trying to tax is primarily from a revenue generation objective.
Yes.
Even though in some countries it has been introduced not for the purpose of just generating revenue, but for the purpose of discouraging excess consumption, to fight health challenges that are coming as a result of that and all of and that. Okay. But when you talk about government, I think in Nigeria specifically, we have a big challenge taxing the informal sector, because for you to be able to impose a tax, not just imposing it, but ensuring its collection, you need to be able to identify that person. You need to be able to identify his source of income and be able to tax it. So I personally think that the major challenge governments have had over time in our country specifically is the ability to develop a database that is that enables them to track each and every participant in the economy of Nigeria. So unless you have this in place, it's difficult to truly broaden the revenue base. But we have seen efforts in the area of the NIN, the National Identification Number System, the bank identification number and all of that, BVN and the rest. These, for me, are tools that could be used to harness the data that government requires to be able to impose tax on people. Unless you do this, then the people who are the itinerant people will always continue to move from one place to the other. You cannot track them. Businesses remain informal, and you are not able to deal with them. But one good thing that I have seen Lagos State done in the past, which they didn't seem to have sustained, was to open up the process for people to genuinely offer themselves for self-assessment, whether or not they are adequate or correct or not. But that kind of creates an opportunity to bring people voluntarily into the tax net. And I think that did work for some time. Why that was not sustained, I really do not understand. But you need to be able to make the compliance to tax laws easy,
yes,
without really making it look as if it's a pain on the people.
Yeah.
So if you don't make it easy, people will shy away from it. But if you make it easy, people will voluntarily come into it. So there's a lot of work to be done in that space. And I think government is thinking more deeply now about broadening the tax base than it had been in the past.
We hear about the 6% tax to GDP thing, and we keep hearing 6% year after year.
Yeah.
But I'm moving on and looking at ongoing legal cases. I mean, issues around the stamp duty thing. We talked about it, or even on this platform, VAT and all of that. We hope that this might, be put to rest as we move on. But what do you make of the revisit of the antiquated stamp duties and capital gains tax that's for holistic reform by the parliament?
Yeah, I think one of the most antiquated tax laws we have in Nigeria, if not the most antiquated law, is the Stamp Duty Act. Because it's an act that was created in the 1930s. That's a very long time ago. And when you look at the kind of activities that the Act seeks to tax, some of those activities no longer exist. Modernization has overtaken them. The issue of technology has also overtaken them. So that certainly is a law that needs a total overhaul. In fact, it needs to be repealed and replaced with a new law that is relevant to the current times that we are in. That's for sure. As for CGT is not that old. It's still quite relevant. But that doesn't mean that it should not be reviewed from time to time, as we are seeing being done via the Finance Act of 2020. The Finance Bill of 2021. Hopefully, if it is passed into law. But the Stamp Duty Act is one that you cannot correct using a Finance Act. You actually need to repeal it and have a totally new bill in place that speaks to the current times.
I'm also looking at technology in aiding tax administration across the country. I think the FRA is also taking advantage of that. What's your assessment with that move?
Yeah, indeed. One of the contents of the Finance Bill 2021 is to give FRS the authority to be able to deploy third-party software to be able to access tax information directly from businesses. It was first introduced via the Finance Act 2020, but then it restricted them only to the use of proprietary software. But in the Finance Bill 2021, it allows them to not just use proprietary software, which, of course, by proprietary software, it means that the software has to be developed and owned by them. That becomes a difficult thing because it means it probably amounts to reinventing the wheel. But with the amendments you have now, they can actually deploy already existing software to be able to access information directly from taxpayers and use that information to raise assessments and, if possible, collect taxes directly. So it's something that the FIRS is taking very seriously. And the truth is that technology is used for every aspect of life.
Yes.
You cannot rule out using it for taxation and expect to perform efficiently. So certainly it's very relevant.
I wanted to talk about the impact of the Finance Act in the past, I think 2 years now, right?
Yeah.
Can we touch briefly on that? What has been the impact, looking at in terms of maybe waivers and other reforms? How has it really impacted our spending plan, our budget?
Well, I think it's still too early to measure impact. Because for you to measure impact, you need to have statistics.
True.
And those statistics must be, you must have them over a period of time for you to be sure that the changes that you are seeing are directly correlate with the Finance Act, implementation of the Finance Act over time. What we can probably just speak about for now really are the implications. That's what everybody still talks about. But if you talk about implications, one key thing that the Finance Act 2019 and 2020 have brought about is certainty. People are becoming more certain, and also clarity. There were a lot of provisions in the various tax laws that were ambiguous and we have had to live with them over the time, and that created a lot of difficulty for business owners and investors. But by making this a consistent thing, these errors that have been, whether probably drafting errors and issues of interpretations that may not have been adjudicated over, or which have been adjudicated over, have now been corrected in the laws themselves. So it makes it makes compliance easier. It makes administration easier. Okay. Now for incentives, you can also, tie it to the issue of incentives. People had also given different interpretations to how certain incentives were to be enjoyed and all of that, and that had created a lot of disputes that could have been avoided. And when there is a dispute, then the time to collect a tax becomes longer than necessary. The cost to collect a tax also become higher than necessary. The cost to comply with a tax law also becomes much more costly, even for the taxpayer. So in that regard, I will say that the Finance Act have been very helpful. They have brought a lot of ease to doing business and a lot of ease to tax administration. Whether it has also helped to increase government revenue is another thing.
It's another thing.
Yeah, mainly because of, if you look at the period within which these Finance Acts have been introduced, we have also had some other intervening factors. COVID was a big factor.
Yes.
But if you look at the financial performance in 2019, you will see that non-revenue was about 50% of the target was what was met by FIRS, for example. And so in 2020, the benchmark seemed to have been brought down in realization of, one, the impact of COVID on the global economy, as well as the fact that the initial projections the projection for the earlier year may not have been realistic. Government had to try to be more realistic. But I can see that those targets are now also being doubled in the 2022 budgets. So FRS is probably expected to rake in about 10 trillion. Okay, so we hope that that is not too ambitious on the part of government. I think we'll probably be able to know for a fact in the next 12 months.
Of course. Let's wrap up on this note. By in few hours, it's 2022, and a lot of projections from all sides, all quarters. You talk to business people, business owners, clients, and all of that. What feelers are you getting, and what's your advice at the moment? Though Nigerians are supposed to pay for this, but just tell us what's your advice in the business environment with regards to tax as we move in 2022.
Yeah, I think we expect, for obvious reasons, that the tax environment is going to be very intense.
Yes.
And this is because government is looking for money wherever they can find it. We are also seeing this in the introduction of new taxes. We are also seeing this in government telling us that they intend to even release a new finance bill mid-year 2022.
Yes.
So it means that every business has to be on its toes, has to be properly directed, and has to understand the implication of all the various tax laws on their businesses and plan for them. Okay, plan to comply, plan to avoid where possible, and so that they will not run into avoidable tax liabilities, which may be arising from non-compliance or arising from lack of awareness.
That's a very good way to leave it. Brilliant submission. Thank you so much. I'm going to speak to a partner at Pedabo, Mr. Killian Khanoba. Thank you so much for spending your day with us. We really appreciate it here at TVC. And a Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, Tolu. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.